You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is a solved case about Chrystul Kizer and how she escaped human trafficking. A survival story that has many different opinions on who is guilty and who is innocent, who is the victim and who was evil. Police negligence and a human trafficking scheme added many more layers to this case, but in the end, only one person is in jail, and many believe they don't deserve to be there. By the way, I post so much content like this. It's my absolute passion to tell these stories, and I mean no harm or disrespect when I do so. So if it's something you'd like to support me in doing, all you have to do is make sure you are subscribed with the post notification bell on, giving this video a thumbs up, and leaving a nice comment down below. I also want to thank today's sponsor, which is Jur. Now, Jur is actually a guided therapeutic journaling app that can be used on iPhones or iPads. Of course, Jur is short for journal, but journaling is something that I've actually been getting into myself because I have heard that it can really better your mental health and just to be able to get your thoughts in line, especially right now when we're all kind of in a slump and not doing the best mentally. This makes it so much easier because you don't have to find a pen and paper, you don't have to remember where you put your journal, and it's all locked on your phone for no one else to see. If you want, you can check in every day to see how you're feeling, and it asks you several questions as kind of prompts to get your journaling started, so you never feel stuck with what to say. Another feature that I love is that Jur has a timed breathing exercise that helps to calm your mind and body. There are also so many different topics you can choose to write about, from relationships, work, future, confidence, to anxiety and stress. It allows you to get it all out, which is especially nice if you have a hard time talking to others about what you're struggling with. Now, if you would like a 7-day free trial for the premium membership, then all you have to do is click the link below in my description box, and that will take you right to it to test it out. And thank you, Jur, for sponsoring this portion of the video. Now let's get back to the story. I also wanted to just say a quick thank you for all of you who have been buying the merch, and I love seeing your gorgeous faces in it, so I put you up on the screen right now. If you want your own picture featured, just tag me on Instagram at BrookeMcKenna_, or if you'd rather not show a picture, you can just tell me what you think about your merch in the comments below, and I'll add that to this little montage as well. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 2018 in Wisconsin, and Randy Volar lived in a one-bedroom home in Kenosha. He was known as a very caring and intelligent man. He was also said to be self-employed. But then after 5 a.m. on June 5th of 2018, a home caught on fire. Now, firefighters were called to the scene to search the home to make sure that nobody was inside, because none of the neighbors knew if the homeowner was actually inside at the time of the fire. No one was screaming, but they did end up locating a body. Now, this was the body of a 34-year-old man, and investigators believed that he had died in this house fire, whether it was being burnt alive or from the smoke. But the medical examination came back and found that he had actually died prior to the fire. He was identified as Randy Volar, and he had missing fingers and toes that had allegedly been with him since birth. He'd always been missing those, but he had one leg shorter than the other as well. He had been shot in the head twice, and investigators now believe that the fire was to dispose of evidence, but they knew that this murder had occurred probably in this home, and they needed to find a killer. Meanwhile, they searched this home for evidence that hadn't been charred in the fire, and investigators found alcoholic bottles on the floor. They found eaten pizza in the fridge, and they didn't find anything too strange until they found multiple hotel room keys, and we will get into the explanation for that in a bit. But neighbors claimed that something was missing from this home because Randy had a BMW that was always in his driveway when he was home because he was always driving it, but it was nowhere to be seen. Investigators knew who this car could lead them to, and so they began to search for it. Shortly after, they found it in Milwaukee, and it was completely abandoned, and they feared that this would mean that there was a dead end. However, when they searched the car, they found a receipt. it was for a Family Dollar, and it was for after Randy had been deceased. So they end up going to the store and asking to see the surveillance footage, and thankfully they did have it, and it had not yet been erased. So investigators were able to see who got out of this car, and they found that it was 4 teenagers. While these teenagers were being tracked down, Randy's credit cards had also come back. They had asked for the records to be sent to them, and they had found that the night prior to his murder, he had only ordered, well, probably two things: pizza and an Uber ride. And this was to his home, but everybody else said he always drove his BMW. So this Uber driver and the teens were both found, and they had one thing in common about their statement. That was a name. You see, one of the teens claimed that he had a sister who was named Chrystul Kizer, and the Uber driver said that he had given a ride to a small, petite black girl named Chrystul. So investigators believed they had a lead. They traced Chrystul Kizer online first, and they found her Facebook. At first glance, it didn't appear to be anything different than a normal teen's Facebook page. There was lots of selfies, she wore lots of colorful wigs, but the one thing that they did find upon closer examination was the fact that the night of the murder, 2 hours prior to the fire burning, after Randy would have been deceased, a selfie had been uploaded of Chrystul, and the caption said, "My mugshot." Now investigators immediately recognized the background because it was curtains inside of Randy's home. Then 3 days after this, Chrystul had live streamed on her Facebook. This was saved to her profile so investigators could see it, and on there Chrystul was heard talking about giving her brother a BMW, and then the possible murder weapon was revealed. Chrystul said to her boyfriend as she held up this gun that she didn't want to shoot anybody else. 4 days after the murder, on June 9th, investigators arrived at Chrystul's boyfriend's house, whom she was living with, named Elaine Nelson. He was actually 3 years older than her, but they arrested this 17-year-old girl who was wearing a shower cap. They put zip ties on her wrist, and they took her down to the station to be questioned. Her bail was immediately posted at $1 million, which was an insane amount of money for this 17-year-old girl. But then Chrystul began to tell her story. At first she said she knew nothing about what had happened, but shortly after she did confess. She said she didn't intentionally try to do this, but she had met Randy about a year prior. This was on a website designed to make money through sex, but she said that Randy actually abused her and sold her to different men to make money for himself because he would keep it. He would take her to different hotel rooms without her consent and force her to go in and have sex with these men for money. But she was scared of what Randy would do if she didn't do what he wanted, because he would often threaten to kill her. She said eventually her boyfriend knew about this and gave her a gun to use as protection, but not necessarily to kill anybody. Chrystul claimed that that night of the murder she had gotten into a fight with her boyfriend and needed somewhere to stay, so she went to Randy's home, but he ended up drugging her and forcing her to the ground, pulling her pants down, getting ready to sexually assault her. And when she told him she didn't want to do any of that, he wasn't stopping. She also claimed that he liked to film these sexual assaults because she wasn't the only one. Chrystul said she heard the pop of the gun next, and she didn't remember shooting him. She also didn't remember setting the fire, but the next thing she knew, she was in the BMW driving away because Randy had promised her the car for her 18th birthday, so technically it was hers. She said she had watched Criminal Minds, so she knew how to set a fire with toilet paper, liquor, and a flame. Now, some of you may be thinking, why did she continue going back to Randy's if she felt so uncomfortable, and why would she go back that night? Well, that's what's called grooming, and it's exactly what it sounds like Randy did to her. The abuser forms a relationship with their victim so they can manipulate them into believing they're not the victim. It can also cause the victim to have a trauma bond with their abuser where they really do feel like they're their friend. So this story kind of sounds like self-defense, right? So why was Chrystul still being charged with murder? Well, that's because the DA claimed that everything Chrystul did was premeditated. Therefore, it was not self-defense. They said that her going on social media and bragging and showing this gun showed she had no remorse and that she had planned this. But Chrystul said she had this gun for a while and it wasn't to murder, it was to protect herself. But texts also showed that Chrystul had texted her brother saying that the BMW she stole was for him. So a lot of people didn't know what to believe. However, investigators were keeping something private about Mr. Randy Volar, the victim. Or what they believed to be the victim, the murder victim, you could say. But you see, he had been under investigation for months prior to this for child sex crimes, and it was said that the day of his murder, they planned to actually arrest him for this. Yet they were being quiet about this entire thing now that he had been murdered, and they painted him as this angel. The investigation into Randy had started 5 months prior to this. It was February 12th when 911 received a call from a 15-year-old girl around 1 in the morning. This girl claimed that a man had given her drugs and was trying to kill her, and she had fled. But after that, she hung up the phone and investigators were sent out to this location. They had traced the phone call to Randy Volar's home, and they were able to track down this girl who was walking the streets, and she was dazed and confused. She was also only wearing a bra with a jacket on that was unzipped, and it was February. It was cold. Her pupils were dilated. She said that she believed she was drugged with LSD, but she had run away from her own home a few months prior to live with Randy. And she said at first he gave her money, he bought her nice things, he introduced her to his mother, he was very nice to her, and they had met off the website that was selling sex as well. The same website that Chrystul had met him through too. But this was Backpage.com, and this was not just a place to sell sex. This was known to be part of the dark web to traffic children. That was just presented as a page to sell sex. But a lot of these children had no idea that that's what it really was. Young girls in need of money were especially targeted, especially by people like Randy. So this 15-year-old girl said that the first time that she met Randy, he paid her $250 to have sex with him when she was 14. Every time after that, it was $100. This girl then went into detail about how Randy was always sexually abusing different underage young girls, filming it, and that when she had spoken up and said something about him finding women his own age, he said that he preferred the bodies of young girls like her. 3 other names were also given by this woman, or by this girl at this point, about other victims that Randy had, and one of them was named Chrystul. Because of this statement, investigators did end up searching his home, and 20 tapes were found of exactly what that girl had said. In fact, these were all black females who were minors. And on these tapes, Randy was assaulting young girls as young as 12 years old. And he was also teaching all of them how to be a better prostitute, how to perform on a man. He called himself an escort trainer. Of course, Randy was arrested, and then over $800,000 was found in his bank account. Now, the bank claimed that they were about to call the police about this anyways, because his bank account was constantly fluctuating, and it had gone up to $1.5 million at one point. And when the bank was asked, who told you to call, who told you that Randy was deceased, they said, we didn't know he was deceased. We were just going to call you because of the strange activity. Because they believed some sort of illegal activity or possibly human trafficking was going on. But Randy, while in custody, said that the money was all due to cryptocurrency. But then, paying no bail at all, no bail was set, Randy was released, and they didn't continue with that investigation at all. Yet they had video proof that Randy was doing these things, and now he was back on the street with no record that he had been caught doing these things to continue doing so. You see, in these cases, I normally like to start out with the victim and telling you about them. And this one, I wanted to do it a little differently because I wanted to show you how heartbreaking it is to not be believed as a victim. So I had to start with Randy because this shows you how easy it can be for the abuser to seem like the victim instead. How easy it is to look at someone who has fought back and think that they're actually the monster instead, when they never threw the first punch, when they were never going to do that if they didn't have to. Chrystul was 17 years old, but she was more than just a victim. She had actually said to be a very imaginative child growing up. She always loved drawing and playing the violin. She was really good at this too, and even though she didn't have the easiest life, her family was a bit different with her mother being 16 when she got pregnant with her. They were happy, and they did try to make it work. Her mother, Volar, had multiple jobs through the day, studied through the night, but by the time Chrystul was in middle school, her mother actually had 3 more children and a boyfriend who was living with them at this time. Chrystul had actually earned herself a spot at the Performing Arts Academy to play in the orchestra. That's how determined and talented she was. But unfortunately, around this time, her boyfriend's mother became violent, and Chrystul said that when they got in trouble, he took it too far and he would get really angry, and she would end up taking her siblings into the bedroom so her mother could call the police. But even though the police would tell him to leave, he would always come back. It would happen all over again, and by 2015, they all had enough and fled from where they were living in Indiana to Milwaukee, where they stayed at a shelter while they tried to get back on their feet and get an apartment, and they had to leave everything behind in order to get away from this man where he didn't know where they were going. Thankfully it worked, but the kids were having a lot of trouble adjusting. Now, Chrystul began to skip school at this time, and her brother was actually stealing cars. But then Chrystul got in a relationship, and this was with a man named Delane, the same man she would be living with in the future that we talked about before. But shortly after this, he was actually charged with battery of Chrystul after hitting her with a stick more than 10 times and dragging her across a parking lot. Unfortunately, this is something that she had watched happen to her mother many times, and so in her mind, I bet it was more normal, and so she stayed with him. And that is also when Chrystul was introduced to these sites like Backpage.com by one of her friends, and she knew she needed to make money, and this was just for simple things like snacks and journals for school, but her mother didn't have the extra money to give her, and Randy was actually the first person to reach out to her and give her everything she wanted and more, everything she knew she deserved. So she knew this money could help her single mother, and she also knew what he ultimately wanted from her, which was sex, but that wasn't something she was opposed to because she thought that he was her friend. So she felt comfortable with it, especially when he bailed her out of jail because a police officer charged her with stealing a car and fleeing an officer. But after this, Randy turned very demanding, and he said that he paid her bail, so she owed him, and he explained in detail the evil things that he wanted her to do. But when she said that she didn't want to do this, he demanded that she had to, that she owed him. And Chrystul was not comfortable with this, so she immediately stopped seeing him, and that is when Randy said that wasn't going to work either. She was going to see him, no matter what. He threatened to kill her if she didn't come over, and Chrystul said she didn't call the police about this because she knew the police didn't do anything. Because she had watched her mother struggle for years to get out of an abusive relationship, and they didn't help her at all. They didn't stop her boyfriend from coming back. They didn't help her find a way out. And so she didn't think they would help her. So even when Randy was selling her to multiple men a day, she didn't believe she could do anything about it. She had to do what he said. She continued to do so because she said he was a grown-up, and she wasn't. But her boyfriend, who was older, told her that she seemed very scared and that she needed to start carrying around a gun to protect herself. That's when he got her a .380 caliber pistol to carry. But even though Randy had paid for her bond to get out of jail while awaiting trial, she still had to go to court for fleeing an officer. And so her boyfriend went with her that day on June 4th, the day prior to the murder, to this court date. And that is when she and her boyfriend got into a fight. And remember, like I told you, her boyfriend was abusive as well. And Chrystul became so scared of him that she called the only other person she believed she could go to, because her mother was dealing with her other siblings. And so she called a friend who she thought was Randy. And she didn't think there was anywhere else for her to go. From there, a murder would occur. And Chrystul explained in detail what had happened that night to the police, saying, "I had went into his house. He had ordered some pizza. We were smoking and he asked me if I wanted to drink any liquor. And then he gave me this drug. I don't know what it's called. And after that we started to watch movies. And then the drug, it made me feel weird or whatever. He started to touch my leg and then like I had jumped and tell him that I didn't want to do that. I just thought that I didn't want to do that stuff anymore because I was trying to change. I tried to get up to get away from him, but I had tripped and I fell on the floor and he had got on top of me and he was trying to rip my pants off, my jeans that I had on. I was just wiggling because once me and Delane had fought, he tried to pin me down, but I wiggled to get loose. I heard like a pop, a high pop. I started to panic." Chrystul didn't make herself the only victim, though. She wasn't playing any sort of victim card. She claimed that both of them were victims, that because of what he was doing to her, she was a victim. And because he should have never died, he was also the victim as well. Now, while she was in jail, Chrystul's friend Yolanda actually began to tell the media that she believed Chrystul was paid to kill this man because she said Chrystul had been receiving around $100 every so often from a woman, and Yolanda believed that that woman was trying to get rid of Randy. However, there was nothing to prove this at all. Unfortunately, many in this case viewed Chrystul and all of the other victims of Randy as prostitutes. That basically they deserved it since they were going on this website. And I do want to tell you that prostitute is never a word I like to use. Sex workers are what they deserve to be called. But children being forced to do sex work after finding themselves in these situations are not sex workers. They are minors and they are victims. Yet investigators in this case blamed them and blamed Chrystul for being manipulated into human trafficking. But they didn't see that she was manipulated. They just blamed her for getting into it, like it was her fault, like she should have known. It was now December of 2019, and a judge actually told her that she did not have access to the affirmative defense law for trafficking victims, which is something that her defense was going to use. This law would have said that Chrystul could plead guilty but avoid liability for any crime due to the trafficking. So even if no one was tried for trafficking her, she could still use that defense. However, the judge at this point said that was no longer an option. She was so heartbroken after this, she began to lean on drawing as a coping mechanism. In fact, she made a board game called Jail Land where she made little tiny pieces that went with a jail setting that could be a fun game for everybody to play. But she said that she also struggles a lot with night terrors every night that keep her up. But then she started getting letters from a 29-year-old white man who said that he wanted to marry her and became her boyfriend while they were both in jail. That's right, he was in jail for child enticement, meaning when he got out, he would be a registered sex offender. It took 2 years of Chrystul being in jail for her bail to be lowered from $1 million to $400,000. She was now 19, and her case was getting some huge media coverage. This created an army of people who believed that she was a survivor who was being punished for surviving. Now, with all of the support and donations to Chicago's Community Bond Fund, Chrystul was able to get out of jail because her bail was paid in June of this year of 2020. However, this is only while she is awaiting trial, and her trial could still end in a life sentence. And the bond fund came out with a statement when they released Chrystul, and they said, "Far too often survivors of violence, especially Black women and girls, are punished for defending themselves. Chrystul's case highlights the urgent need for the criminal legal system to stop prosecuting survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault." Now, the Milwaukee Freedom Fund has also been helping Chrystul, and they are asking for a world that protects, not punishes, young Black survivors. Because that's a huge problem with the criminal justice system. Not just in this case, but in many others, Black females are seen as much older and more mature than many other people. And this causes their vulnerabilities and struggles to be overlooked, causing the victims to be blamed. Their sides are not acknowledged and their voices are not heard. And I am not sitting here saying that I know how that feels. I do not. But I feel heartbroken that anybody has to go through that. And I hope that I did a good job of speaking on the injustices that Black women face, because it's still happening today. This case is an awful lot like another case that got huge media attention that you may have heard of, which is the Cyntoia Brown case. She was actually a 16-year-old girl who killed a man who she was being sold to for sex. She was actually sentenced to life in prison for this, and she said that she was being sold by her own boyfriend, and she began to just work like she believed she had to bring in enough money that he would let her stop. When a 43-year-old man brought her back to his home, she had a gun, and she started using it for protection as well, because these situations are dangerous for young girls. And she said she shot him in the head out of fear that night. But this case gained huge media coverage in 2017, and because of that and all the celebrities like Kim Kardashian who were speaking out on this, she was released last year in 2019. But this is what many hoped would happen to Chrystul if they got her name out in the public enough. However, on the opposite side, Randy's father claimed that the truth hadn't yet come out and that the perceptions of his son were all wrong, that he was a good man who was respected and missed. However, Chrystul's mother found a journal belonging to Chrystul when she got all of her belongings, and there was a list of goals in there, and these goals were so innocent. She said she wanted to finish school, gain 20 pounds, and go out and do better. Chrystul's attorney is now building a case for her, saying that she isn't a danger to herself or the community, and that her actions were a reflection of trafficking, not being a threat to the public. But the DA continues to say she's going to kill again, just like she planned to kill Randy. Since the judge at the circuit court level denied the affirmative defense, they are planning to go to the appellate court to get them to allow it. The problem is this defense has never been used in a homicide case, which is why they're having so much trouble with it. But Chrystul has also said that she would take a deal offering her to plead guilty of felony murder instead of first-degree intentional homicide, and this would mean that she would get 15 years. The court date has not yet been set in this case, and that is all I could find on it, meaning that it's still ongoing and we have no idea how it's going to end, but I wanted to tell you about it because I'm hoping we can do something to help her. Do you believe she planned to kill him? Should she get life in jail? Why is everyone blaming her? Is it possibly because she was a sex worker? Possibly because she was Black? When will we stop blaming the ones who already had to fight to survive and now are having to fight to be believed? When will that stop? Thankfully, the website that I talked about in this case that was being used for human trafficking has since been shut down, but human trafficking still happens everywhere to innocent people all over the world who have no idea what kind of situations they are getting themselves into and are suddenly in this horrific situation that very rarely do people get out of. I want to hear your opinions on this case, but I want them to be kind and respectful. I don't want anybody who is like Chrystul to come to the comment section and see people filled with hate. I normally don't do such recent cases, but I really do think that Chrystul's case and story deserves to be told, and I'm happy that I got to share it with you today, so thank you for listening to it. But don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay? Bye.